Okay,
No,
thank
it's
you so
it's
much.
it's one. I mean, he's been working, chipping away at a hole in the mountain to get to the other side for 20 years on the scalable vector graphics, and you know, it's a lot of work, and he kept at it and stuff, and all of the stuff that's been on top of that, the true type and
Yeah,
uh, really the scalability of the system and keeping it small. I mean, that's to me, having an IDE that fits in under 700 classes. I mean, you look at Pharaoh with 10,000 classes in the base image. I mean, you just or getting oriented in that environment. If you got a small brain like mine, it's I can't use it. It's too wacky for me. So, yeah, Greece is
yeah.
pretty bad.
I don't actually think that being small is so impressive. In the old days, Dan Ingalls made his mini squeak that was way smaller than Quiz. So it's not the first small image. I guess the only difference is that we resist the temptation to keep adding stuff. It's more an attitude than, I don't know, advanced engineering or something. And the vector graphics is something new, and there are no other developer environments that work like that. And I can't understand why. I mean, when the first Retina displays started to appear, it became pretty clear that measuring things in pixels made no sense at all. So yeah,
Well, I
that took
watched,
a lot of work.
I did watch the few videos I've seen that you put out, like the first time in a meeting like this, where you kind of introduce it to everybody and then some follow on meetings and whatever. And I played with it, and it's like, yeah, this makes perfect sense with signal theory. And like you said, why doesn't anybody else do it? I
Yeah.
don't know. Very
Yes.
few
What
attempts.
what Windows and Mac OS do about scaling and letting you resize things is very crude. They didn't really think, come up with a consistent idea and follow it through all the consequences. They never did that. They only kept back compatibility with every assumption everyone was having and never dared to go beyond that. They could have done this too, of course. Actually, the first people who tried to do something like this after PostScript and some earlier printer languages, page description languages for laser printers in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, it was that somebody did something that was called display PostScript, and the
Yeah,
idea was,
I remember when that came out.
yeah, and that didn't work well because machines were too slow. Okay, so today, not only we can do that, we can do that in floating point instead of integral coordinates, and that's avoid all the jumping by one pixel that you used to get all the time on those early systems. That they rounded all the coordinates to integer, so when whatever you did, you will see stuff jumping like that and not being smooth like in quiz. That's because machines are not so fast that you can do everything properly. Yeah,
I think another problem with scaling in a lot of systems, and I mean, I have this all the time with Linux and trying to keep things up to date and whatnot, is picking the right battles and letting go of the right things to dodge the bullet. Because people put on the hair shirt and say, well, we got to solve all the hard problems. We got to grind away all n dimensions at once. And when you do that, you have a huge surface where you can have one problem that sucks you in. And having, in particular, saying, okay, we'll just start with a fresh image, we'll load packages. The packages will check to make sure their requirements are there, and so everything just loads. And we will not try to say, oh yeah, well, we'll be able to roll back this, or, doing some of the heavy duty solutions uh, and versioning and stuff, but still avoiding the library hell, where you're trying to get a set of components with all the right libraries with the right versions in to work some particular component, which then has to work with something else. Uh, I think having the simpler solution where you just start from scratch, you load the packages, the requirements are checked, having a composition strategy. There aren't, I mean, I'm not using the commercial small talks, but in terms of Squeak and Pharaoh, the lack of a composition strategy, and they could just adopt, the Quiz code or whatever, I think really, really hurts them, because it just, you just end up, with this ball of mud. You keep adding and adding and adding, and it's very difficult. At least Squeak has kept it down to about 2,700 classes. They've been trimming, more in the last couple of years. But and Pharaoh, at least I guess I embarrassed them a little bit that they were getting up to like 12,000 classes in the base image, and now they've got it down to about 10. But the amount of engineering work to keep things small, I just have to once again thank Juan for continually refining and reducing things to where things carry their own weight, removing the muda, the stuff that doesn't carry its own weight. That's just wonderful.
Yes, I'd like to repeat that as well. I think it's great that that we try to keep it as small as possible. That's very important, I guess. Uniform as possible. That makes it a joy working with. I do have a question regarding the vector graphics. So, if I remember vaguely, you said that there were some features which were still missing, or is now everything complete from your point of view?
No, no, I am planning. I have some enhancements that I know how to do, but haven't had time to work on them yet. They are relatively minor, if you wish. One is dotted and dashed lines. That some of the early prototype I did many years ago had it. Then the version that got published didn't have that. And Hilaire needs that for Dr. Geo. So I re-implemented it, but only in the Smalltalk version of the engine. So today, if you use dash lines, those lines are rendered by Smalltalk code. So if you use a really lot of them, it could become slower than it should. So that's something I want to add. And something else is that you know that Morphic always supported clipping, but traditionally it was clipping to rectangular areas. I implemented clipping to any morph shape. There's no specification of the shape of a morph. It's just the draw on method draws, and that defines the shape for grabbing with the mouse or whatever. You don't need to write any other geometry code. And I also implemented clipping to those arbitrary um, shapes. But the code that is right now can only do that at one level. So if you have an ellipse instead of a star and both clips contents, and you add a submorph to the ellipse and want it to be clipped to both of them, that is not working today. Um, because when I implemented this, I didn't have a good design to do that. I didn't know how to do it, so I only did it for one level. That is usually enough. Nobody ever complained about that. But then I found a way to do it at several levels without adding a ridiculous amount of stacks of masks for every morph that would make everything
Mhm.
slower. And I know how to do that. I have some prototype code lying around, but that
Mhm.
needs to be integrated into the engine, that needs to be integrated into the official VMs. So it's something that I need to do with a lot of care, because I don't want to push buggy code on the VM and get everybody in trouble. So it's not too difficult, but it will take several months.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
then I also have ideas that I haven't done yet. From day one, I wanted to be besides doing vector graphics, also do advanced image resampling to be able to work with pictures in the same way as with vector graphics, essentially.
Ah, okay.
And there is a image processing package that is not part of the base image, and the vector engine does nothing with images. And that's something that someday could be useful to be able to use textures, for example, in vector
Mhm.
graphics,
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Mhm. Okay. So, okay. One question, I think you answered it already sometime, but I forgot. So right now the plugin works with CPU, not GPU. I mean, I know that many graphics backends nowadays use GPUs for that. Is that correct or?
That is correct, and the thing is that, well, this is getting technical. I hope everybody is interested in this because it is going deeper and deeper. Um, Maybe it's much for a general talk. The thing is that there are several things that a GPU can do. Okay, in general, a GPU can do OpenGL and things similar to OpenGL. Um, Microsoft may call it DirectX, or Apple can call it, I don't know, Metal or whatever, but it's still essentially OpenGL. OpenGL is a kind of language or a way to specify vector graphics, and the implementation of the vector graphics is done by the GPU. GPUs were born to do that, to run games. Okay, but they use the traditional approach to anti-aliasing.
Mhm.
Sorry, sorry. They do the traditional approach to anti-aliasing, that is pixel coverage. That is assuming that um, that a continuous image uses a fraction of a rectangular tile and computes what area of each pixel is covered, as assuming that pixels are tiles. Okay, that's what GPUs do, and that is not what the signal processing theory says is the correct way to do it, and that's why in Quiz you can rotate text and it looks better than in most other renderers. Okay, so
Any other renderers?
yeah, actually, yes. Thank you. So we could do another a new class in the vector engine Smalltalk hierarchy that calls uh, OpenGL, for instance. I believe that Mariano Montone, when the work in the plugin was not yet mature enough, did something like that for Cairo. Okay, that Cairo does essentially the same as the GPUs only in software. So something like that to use the GPU could be done. Perhaps you could save battery on a handheld device. Um, I'm not sure if there is any other advantage. You will lose quality, and we will have less control over how those algorithms work. Those algorithms are completely coded in Smalltalk that gets translated to C. Each arithmetic operation on each part of each pixel is done by our code. So that's why we can control it so well.
Mhm.
Um, in addition to all this, there is something else that GPUs can do, that is general computing, what is called GPU. Okay, GPUs can also be programmed to run any code you want and not just OpenGL graphics. Okay,
Mhm.
Yeah, like Bitcoin mining.
so yes, for example, for Bitcoin mining, but for many other things, also for deep learning, the modern AI models all run on GPUs. And several years ago, I worked on a project on a satellite company for doing satellite image processing, and I did an image rectifier that does image resample to, because a satellite takes an image of the Earth in an angle that is not the same perspective and the same geometry that you get on a map. So you need to resample everything and correct geometrically to make it look like Google Maps. And we needed high performance, so I studied some GPU techniques to do that on GPUs, and I implemented that on a language that is called OpenCL. OpenCL is a general purpose language that is very similar to C, but that can do parallel processing, taking advantage of GPUs. My original idea was to do the vector graphics engine in OpenCL using the same techniques. I got quite familiar with them. But there are two problems with OpenCL. It could still be done, but there are two problems. One is that Apple, who invented OpenCL and got together the industry committee to standardize it and everything, so they led the effort and they are the owners of the trademark and everything, and then they removed support from macOS. So right now you have OpenCL by default on most Linux systems and all Windows systems, but not on Mac, even if Apple invented it. So Apple sometimes does crazy things. The other problem is that OpenCL has a long startup time. When you call OpenCL to do something, it needs to be something that will take quite a long time and be very intensive. Then you pay for the startup time. If you just call it to draw segments of lines, just a little part of a letter in true type, for instance, you need to call it 100 times for each letter you display on the screen, then it's over 95% of the time building stacks to do the call. So that part is very slow because it has a scheduler that schedules the calls and does a lot of stuff. It's the architecture of OpenCL. It's very good for few calls that are very expensive, like I did that image processing project that works extremely well, but not for this. So the truth is that there's currently not a good way to do that on the GPU.
Mhm.
OpenCL is not good, OpenGL is not good,
Mhm.
and the CPU code works well enough.
Mhm.
It could work still better. We could do some parallelization on the CPU using SIMD primitives that are present in GNU-C and are semi-standard, but our Slam compiler don't support them, and maybe not all platforms would support that. And I'm not sure if the performance improvement would be enough to justify the effort. So there is some room for exploring possibilities there.
Right. Mhm.
Truth is that so far on modern CPUs it works quite
Good
well.
enough. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I,
Actually, so far, sorry, just one last comment, and I will stop with this. When I wrote the vector engine code, I expected the rasterization of the cues to pixels would be the slowest part. Actually, that's not the slowest part. The slowest part is the fill with color of the already delimited areas. And that is done with code that is essentially bit clipped. And that takes more than half of the time, about 2/3. So if we want to improve performance, we need to do some statistics and see where it's worth doing. It's not obvious.
thanks for the detailed explanation.
Yeah, most welcome.
In Dr. Geo, I have example of sketch with hundreds of graphic objects, and it's performing quite well. I must say, yeah.
Yeah, it's not good enough for doing, I don't know, a 3D render or a high quality game. but it's good enough for doing simple games. So
And
I have a simple question about a separate question about porting. I noticed there's a lot of packages out there that people ported to Cuis-4 range, um, like NeoJSON and NeoCSV and Ada, small, Zinc, Teapot, all these different packages. And there used to be a package that you guys recently removed called the Squeak compatibility layer. So I'm assuming, that's not needed anymore for things. But when a person is doing porting, do you have any kind of suggestions? Like I have a bunch of Smalltalk code in images that I can't even run right now because I have to go find the right version of the VM from the mid 2000s in order to fire up that image format. This is before COG even. Um, and I would like to get some of that code and look at it and see if I could port some things in. And I just yesterday started porting the 2005 version of the XMPP client that Michael Roiger had done back in the day. And it's all Smalltalk. It doesn't like wrap the Strophe library or anything like that, so you don't need any C extensions. And the first thing it ran into with connecting to a modern XMPP library is it needed Start TLS, which is not implemented in Squeak SSL. So you just start working through all these things, and I see a lot of the code has a bunch of problems. They've tried to handle Unicode in different ways, whereas Quis, I think, has a really nice Unicode interface that's way better than anything I've seen before, and you don't need to worry about it. You just use your text. So then you're going through code and you're finding all these calls to Unicode code point things and on and on, and it's like, you just kind of have to walk through all those and just get rid of them and try to figure out.
we don't have
a ton of work, so.
we don't have a standard way to do that, or a set of guidelines on how to do that. We don't have a migration guide or anything like that.
Okay.
I think you brought an important area when you mentioned Unicode, and yeah, the support for Unicode in Quiz tries to make your life simpler. And the same happens with the design of nested coordinate systems in Morphic. So when porting code for Morphic or code that deals with Unicode from other dialects, I expect that essentially 90% of what you will do is to remove stuff you don't need anymore. But the APIs are different, and there's never been some people from time to time talk about ANSI Smalltalk, but ANSI Smalltalk is too old, too limited, too small, and I'm not sure anyone is supporting it right now. And it would not be a solution to the problem you say. I would love people from different dialects to come together and agree on something. I don't know what it
Well,
would
from
be.
the Morphic perspective, I wouldn't even try to port a Morphic app from Squeak or Pharaoh. I would just rewrite it in Morphic 3 because it's so much cleaner and simpler.
Yeah.
It's the backer, the back end things like, like the XMPP libraries or some of the different web frameworks that people have created. Like I know there's always going to be people who say, oh, I want Seaside on Quiz. There's a lot there. It's a big port. And they even have their own layer called Grease between the three level, different Smalltalks they support, because they have Gemstone, Syncom, Pharaoh, Squeak, on and on and on. And so they created Grease way back in the day. I think Julian Fitzel wrote that, and initially him and Avi Bryant. And it's still, there's a lot of work there to port it into something, because you guys, there's even simple, methods on string that have multiple not conditions in the method name, and those aren't in Quis because you don't need them. But so then you still have to walk through all of that stuff when you're trying to bring it into the image and figure out, when everybody calls the ASCII method, what do we do in Quis? Like there's what is it, user, I wrote it down somewhere. The ASCII message is obsolete, and now there's use character in Quis. So you have to find those things. But like you said, since there isn't any kind of a transition guide and stuff like that, that's going to be incumbent on people like me and other people who want to port packages to write down the things that I had to go through and make documentation to say, these are some things I found when trying to go from Squeak or whatever to Quis today, because that, for example, the Squeak compatibility package isn't available anymore, or isn't part of the modern thing.
I think that's what would need to happen. Uh, we are not a large community, but on many things we tend to think alike. So I think there are several people in the community who could collaborate on such effort. I agree that Greece is the closest we have in the Smalltalk world to cross-dialect compatibility specification. We should support that. Uh, this issue of compatibility and porting comes up from time to time, and I think that it needs to be led by the people who want to have dialect interoperability. I think that it's not the maintainers of Quiz or the maintainers of Faro or the maintainers of Bast or Gemstone the ones who need to lead the effort. What we must do is to support the effort, to be willing to collaborate and to compromise on some things in order for things to work. But the people who need to lead that effort and need to push us so that happens is you, is people writing to wanting to use the various dialects, and the reason is because you are the people who use several dialects. I cannot assess the precise problem of porting code from to any other dialect because the only dialect I use is Quick. So and when I need some code that is only in another dialect, what I tend to do is to adopt it, to fork it, adopt it, and this fork, this version of whatever code is part of the quiz ecosystem now. So it will not evolve anymore together with the original one.
And that was the same. That's the same philosophy that I'm thinking of. It's like I'm not gonna try to take the XMPP code from 2005 from Squeak, port it into Quis, and then somehow make sure that it still runs on other dialects. No one's touched that code forever. I want to use it. I'm going to make a Quis package that works. Hopefully I can make that happen. And then we will have an XMPP client in Quis. And nobody else will have one. That's their problem. They can figure it out. That's my thought process. Is it's not trying to create. I don't really want to create some way to. It would be a nightmare to maintain something like that. To try to create some layer that would just you can file in code. The design principles are all different. The complication that people put into their code and different. People explode their class hierarchies in Smalltalk just like they do everywhere else, and I don't think it would be a winning battle. It would be a losing battle.
I agree with that. I don't think that everybody needs to agree with that vision. If someone wants to maintain some cross dialect package and make it work, I would support that too because I'm not the police anybody's work. If you want to do as you suggest, I think you should keep frequent communication with the community in the mail list, even if at first you don't get much help, because at some point someone will start at least running your code, running your tests if you have them, and helping with small details or writing a little bit of documentation or whatever. Or maybe someone else needs what you are doing and will get seriously involved. So my only request is please don't do such efforts in isolation. Try to communicate and welcome collaboration.
Yeah, I didn't have. Yeah, I was definitely gonna do that because I'm gonna ask questions and see if people have little suggestions for this, that, and the other. You know, and it's the same thing like everything else. This wasn't designed to just be an XMPP client. The structure of the code is a generic instant messaging client that you could add handlers for other kinds of protocols, and the only one that's implemented is XMPP. So it's like there's probably 3 or 4 extra layers of code in the package that doesn't really help for the purpose that it actually came out with, I guess. I mean, I understand writing generalized code and I understand what they were thinking of in the beginning, but at the same time, now we have a bunch of code that's not performing the service that you need and creates extra layers of complication that you have to kind of walk through. And that's fine, but I'll definitely be asking questions. And I've already got a couple that I'm getting ready to post related to just the development environment and like getting rid of different strategies for getting rid of objects that are hanging around that should be gone, and I don't know why they're not gone. You know how that goes. But
And if you have some code, some problem that you can bound to a small example, for instance, a do it, a workspace do it, or something like that, and you can say this do it works in Squeak if you load this and this and this, and this is what I'm doing in Quiz, and it doesn't work. What's going on? I usually cannot resist the temptation to go and take a look. So you can take advantage of me and of other people in the community who love tinkering with things and will help if possible. With respect to what you said before, that running that old code is difficult, if you have all the images that you want to run, all quick images that you want to run, the best ways to run all the images are to have a Windows machine or a Windows VM in whatever machine you use. I use a Mac, and one of the reasons for having a Windows VM is to run any Squeak image I can need. You just grab any old Excel file. You don't need to build anything, and it will run the images from its time. And Windows handles that much better than Apple or Linux.
okay,
And the other place where you can try running all the images that I believe works very well too is Squid.js, the JavaScript VM. It's
yeah, I
very
did
compatible.
definitely look. I was looking at that, and I watched a talk from Vanessa,
Yeah,
and so I ran a couple of old images that they provided. So that's definitely an option.
yeah, those are the best two I know.
Does vector graphic quiz run on this? I have not tried it recently.
Sorry?
Does quiz with vector graphics run on it?
Yes. No, well, Squid.js doesn't have the vector engine plugin, okay? So if you run Quiz without the vector engine plugin, it uses bit graphics most of the time, and it caches to type using the Smalltalk version of the vector engine. So it will run the Smalltalk vector version of the vector engine, but if there is no plugin, vector graphics engine plugin available, what Quiz does is to disable the scale and rotate halos and morphs. Okay, so you don't get arbitrary scaling and rotation. You could enable those, but if you enable them, it would be way too slow to be usable. because it would run everything in Smalltalk, not in the plugin, and Squid.js is slower, way slower than code. Okay, this
So the vector graphic plugin would need to be written in Java, need have to be written in JavaScript if it should be
and
fast.
if you do that correctly, you could write it using HTML5 vector graphics primitives and do something that works quite well. It should be possible. It should be totally possible,
Okay.
but it is a major project.
Yes, and also you don't get the nice SO rendering, right?
Yes, but you get whatever the browser does, and if I remember correctly, when Dan Ingalls did his lively kernel stuff, at least at that time, some time ago, I remember that it looked Cairo quality on Firefox, but it looked much better in Chrome. So Chrome had an HTML5 vector graphics renderer that is cross-source, but it's not using Cairo, it's using their own stuff that at least at that time looked much better. So
This
they
is
could be doing something similar to what Quiz does, I don't know.
isn't that layer called Skia?
I believe it was before Skia, and I didn't follow
Okay.
their developments. Yeah, it was before Skia. And I haven't looked Skia in enough detail to tell if it's any better in quality than Cairo. They say it's better in performance, I believe that. I haven't really paid too much attention.
But still,
But,
it
but
uses
that,
the same. It still uses the same old way of rendering, right?
I don't
Not.
know. I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know. What I do know is that both the vector graphics API I did and the HTML5 are inspired by SVG. Okay, so the APIs are not very different. So it can
Quick,
work.
question, if you have time to update us on whatever might be happening on a different lobe, a different plane on Bootstrap and something toward Pharaoh Candle or whatever to uh, reproduce Quis and layers from the source. How are is there any activity that's happening there that we can see or contribute to or whatever?
Not in the last couple of months. I presented Bootstrap and libraries last year in November in the past Smalltalk conference, and the only thing that happened since then is that when I refactored a character, for instance, we had two classes characters, and now we only have one, and those kind of changes that you need to modify the Bootstrap because the Bootstrap a different thing. I did update that. So you get the same functionality that was there at that time, updated to current quiz, but no new stuff. I need to get back to that, perhaps in a couple of months. It's not easy. There is a lot of stuff to do. Something that I didn't think it would take too much work, but it actually did, is the release process. It looked like something very simple, but after doing the release process, or while doing the release process, we started modifying the directory structure for Quiz, and we embedded the VM into the distribution to make it easier for people to use. And that kind of things are not so interesting as new stuff, but they take some work too. So yeah, I will go back to Bootstrap and libraries. Uh, One of the reasons is that my employer, Labware, needs them for their business. Okay, but they don't need the full bootstrap of a full quiz image from a minimal image and a layer of packages. So they are not asking for that. So that will happen, but it will be slower. That could take a couple of years, I'm afraid, unless someone else wants uh, to do a lot of effort on that. And the problem
compared
is,
compared to all of the previous attempts at what you're doing with that, it's a lot more ambitious and a lot more usable. So take all the time you need because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, what I did last year is a proof of how do you say that? To prove that it is possible. Okay, the bootstrap works and the libraries can be
Proof
loaded.
of concept. Proof
It's
of
a proof
concept.
of concept, yes. The big problem now is that even if Quiz is much smaller than the other alternatives, it's still not small enough. It needs to be breaking up into packages, and those packages have to have clear dependencies between them, and that will require reworking the code. And the limitation that I accepted for libraries and Bootstrap is that I don't want libraries to have state. I want to be a full Bootstrap from sources, and sources don't include state. So the state must be built somehow. So any state in the current image needs to be turned into code that creates that state. And so that's additional work on the code of the image to do this. So it's not that the libraries are not good enough, but the code needs to be modified, the actual source code, and not just split in packages. Uh, so that will take some some time, some effort. Yeah.
So that any state that that image needs to have the target image when it runs, it needs to generate that state from code because the system, the Bootstrap system,
Yeah,
can't do that. It can't run on the target necessarily at all. So
there are a couple of exceptions. For example, the Bootstrap creates a Smalltalk system dictionary. Okay, that is state and it goes in the child image. Uh, but any code that does links, marries together the image that generates the child image and the new image. Okay, so it's bound things that should be separated. Ideally, it should all be specified in source code. So I only want to do that for bootstrapping minimal images, but not for libraries. I don't want libraries to need to run scripts on a building image to build the library with state that will later be used. That creates dependencies that are much harder to manage in the long run between the code that sets the library, the image that sets the library, and the image that uses the library. I would libraries to only use source code. And it can be done. It's just some time on cleaning up code because any state that you cannot study the code that created it has a lot of troubles. Security people say it's a room uh, for attacks, or and also limits flexibility, understanding. Yeah, all these issues you raised during this meeting, we can also discuss them on my list, of course, anytime,
I, I,
anywhere.
are you planning to do that bottom up or more like top down? If you understand what I mean, you can start with the image and say, okay, I split it in two, and then the two smaller halves are split in two again, and so on. Or you could start with really a kernel image, which code which is a minimal image which just does some code and then add libraries later.
Yeah, there are several approaches possible. I'm still not sure what is the best way, and the problem is at each point what tools you have in your hand to work. Over these years, Quiz got reduced from Squeak as much as possible without losing the fundamental tools to be able to work comfortably.
Right. So
So
that would mean probably the top-down approach would be
that's
a
what
little
we
bit
have been
better.
doing so far. But
Mm.
the moment you don't have a browser and debugger, what is the point of going top down?
Mhm.
At least if you go bottom up, the stuff you're working on is you don't have tools, but it's very small. So at least it's easy from that point of view.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a fascinating, difficult problem.
Okay, so we only have 5 minutes left. These calls have a limit of 1 hour. Hilaire suggested moving to a different uh, platform for meetings for the next meeting. Jitsi is an open source, widely used platform. Perhaps we will do that. I don't know, Hilaire, if you want to comment something more about that, or what else to talk about for this minute.
Yes. Yes, there is no limit with Jitsi regarding the 1 hour slot. So I tested last Sunday with my son. We can chat for 2 hours without issue, and it should be, I think, it should be better. But most of the features are the same. There is some more features like a whiteboard, a collaborative whiteboard. So we never need that, but who knows? Yeah. So I think this will be better.
I've used Jitsi for years. It works fine. As long as you know, like this many people or even a few more, it would have no issues. It's only when you start getting into really big meetings that it needs a back-end concentrator, and they have a commercial service called 8x8, I think. That's not, I mean, it's not the cheapest one out there, but Jitsi works great, and it's super easy to just drop in 2 people. All you gotta do is type in the URL, give it to the other person, and you're in your video chat. And you can just make them up on the fly. Like, you don't have to, like with Google, it has to generate this code for you, but with Jitsi, you just type in whatever you want at the end of meet.jit.si, and it works great. So.
Cool.
How long do we have still?
We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So at least we can quit properly.
Something that was mentioned a couple of times in the mail list and elsewhere was the possibility of doing coding sessions on these meetings. I am a bit scared of doing that. Because you know, when you don't know what you will be doing and you cannot try it before, who knows how things will end. So I'm not really sure if that's a good idea, or we need a different idea to be able to do that.
Or maybe we can have something a bit lighter, like, for example, if there is some question regarding some feature that, one of the guests may just, demonstrate on the code on quiz, you know.
Yeah, I think that can be done.
It will be easier. It will be definitely easier.
Not start a coding project with an objective for an end of a meeting, but just show something and play a bit with. Yeah, that sounds good.
I think you could experiment with smaller settings. So do it with 2 people and see how it goes, and then maybe in a larger setting. I for one, I learned a ton of things if I just watch someone else program and use the tools. It's just amazing. Every time I do this, I'm just amazed what you can learn. What you would never think of asking or telling.
Yeah, there is value there. Meeting in person and doing pair programming is great, of course.
What we can do also, maybe in advance of the meeting, we can collect questions regarding some feature on a quiz. Then one of the guests will answer to the question and demonstrate something. So we can just prepare in advance, and we can collect question, and if there is volunteer to, that's all.
Yeah, it's threatening to kick us out.
Yeah, so maybe we say goodbye. It's better.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
See you in the mailing list.
Cool.